Gojo has everyone scared for his life. Not only has Sukuna defeated his domain expansion for the second time, but Gojo doubles down on his choice and casts it for the third time. After all, as Yaga told us in chapter 3, sorcerers should live with their choices and the outcomes of it, in which life is a gamble, and without risk, defeating Sukuna would be impossible. However, as Geto reminded us, Gojo declaring anything impossible is arrogance, as he himself is capable of anything and can make it into reality due to his title of being the strongest. But the red flags are appearing everywhere. Even Kashimo states in chapter 227, if Gojo dies, I will fight Sukuna next and no one can stop me. Let's see, do we have any objections from the others? But with the third cast of domain expansion, we can't forget the fact that chapter 225 explicitly states that one of the only ways Gojo can run out of curse energy is via spamming his domain, leading us to the next question. Why would Gojo make this choice if that's the case? Well, it all begins with Jujutsu Kaisen portraying domain expansion as the pinnacle of sorcery, and chapter 227 is proof that Gojo and Sukuna are indisputable masters of this art. From an immovable object versus an unstoppable force, they've reached a clash between 1,000 years of experience and inconceivable natural talent.
It's about to go down.
Yup, their battle, which was already on superhuman level, has escalated even further, with both of them spamming domains. But speaking of things being impossible for others, we were told there are barely any sorcerers who can use domain twice in a single day, let alone within the span of a few minutes. This is because of the extreme amount of curse energy required for casting an innate domain, and more importantly, the fatal consequence of curse technique burnout. Gojo himself was experiencing the same burnout, but in chapter 226, he did something nobody thought was even possible. He used reverse curse technique to heal it and get back to 100% of his condition. Satoru Gojo achieved the impossible. This completely baffles all the sorcerers watching the fight, including Yuta Akatsu, the one sorcerer who we were told is second to none to Gojo. Kenjaku doesn't believe in him, but Gojo is giving him a masterclass even right now as his sensei on how to increase his power level, as Yuta is one of the few sorcerers who understands this phenomena, since reverse curse technique is so rare. However, Gojo's feet right now has him like this, questioning his entire life as if it was a lie. According to Yuta, it should have been impossible. After all, injuries to the body can be healed easily with reverse curse technique, but a burnout from a domain expansion is a whole different ball game. Yuta gives an analogy that it's like when a machine is not broken but can't perform properly due to overheating. Hence, all it can do is wait until it has cooled down. But Gojo healing his burnout right in front of their eyes is more than evidence that understanding the core of curse energy and true jujutsu, as Gojo and Sukuna have done, makes them enlightened sorcerers beyond comprehension, entering the divine realm. Gojo's use of technique is beyond human comprehension, making everyone worried that he's pushing himself too far. Needless to say, Gojo himself has no care for that, as he challenges Sukuna to expand his domain once again, more specifically alter his domain's parameters with a binding vow on the fly, as Gojo knew that Sukuna's effective range is more than what he cast earlier. Remember guys, Malevolent Shrine has a radius of 200 meters, which Sukuna can manipulate freely, as he casts a 140 meter radius one in chapter 119 to kill Mahoraga whilst protecting Megami. This is a hint that he actually knew about Sukuna's open domain from the get-go. I mean, it would definitely be odd for nobody to mention it either, but despite Knowing this, Gojo still attempted to counter it with Unlimited Void, just to, experiment and to find out more about Sukuna's fighting style as they reveal each other's trump cards. Thus, as they both expand their domains once again, this time, Gojo reverses the conditions of his domain. Well, you're probably confused. What does that even mean, ABD? Well, in the first clash, whilst Gojo and Sukuna's domain were evenly matched on the inside, where the sure hit attacks cancelled each other out, Sukuna won the tussle because his attacks destroyed the outside of Gojo's domain barrier. But now, Gojo basically reversed the interior requirements with the exterior ones, making it a domain that is strong against attacks from the outside so that it won't break as easily as earlier. It's very clear that Gojo is learning things on the fly from Sukuna, because even though he gains the upper hand in attacks, Gojo very quickly adapts to them with his raw flair for Jujutsu and ends up turning the table completely. Just look at how, right now, Sukuna is doing whatever he can do to avoid Unlimited Void, a flip as to how Gojo was trying to do the same thing in the previous chapter. However, Sukuna should not be taken lightly because of his endless experience fighting the most vicious sorcerers of the Heian era, the golden age of cursed techniques, which is why it shocks Gojo when Sukuna uses domain amplification whilst having his domain expanded?
I'm confused!
Now, for you silly willies who don't have our notification turned on, Sukuna used amplification in chapter 225, and we explained what it is. It's pretty much a barrier technique that amplifies its user's curse energy aura with the characteristic of a domain, and like it, can be potentially imbued with an innate technique. However, the user can also choose to leave it empty to instead force the opponent's sure hit attack into an empty space, thus nullifying their ability upon contact. This is how Sukuna avoids Gojo's Unlimited Void. This is also explained in chapter 171, mentioning that when Jogo and Hanami used domain amplification against Gojo in chapter 85, it was powerful enough to include a curse technique, but they refrained from doing so, all in order to neutralize Gojo's Limitless within the amplified barrier. But the one drawback of this technique is the inability to use an innate technique at the same time. This applies to Sukuna as well, right? Well, technically it does. But this is another reminder why Sukuna is the king of curses and enlightened, as Gojo notices that Sukuna's output has greatly increased, whilst he is still expanding his domain, though he concludes this is not impossible for Sukuna, with his battle IQ being commendable, as Gojo points out that during amplification, Sukuna can't use his innate technique engraved on his body, but he still should be able to use techniques which are already imbued onto his domain. Alright, you're all confused. Let me explain. Sukuna's curse technique involves two types of slashing attacks, dismantle and cleave, and when he activates his expansion, his technique is imbued within the domain itself, allowing Sukuna to just stand and witness the carnage as Malevolent Shrine relentlessly attacks all targets within its effective range. So technically, Sukuna is not using his innate technique himself, which is why he can also use domain amplification at the same time. Gojo wouldn't be able to do this, as he can't attack with red, blue or purple whilst using amplification, because his innate curse technique, Limitless, is engraved on his body. Regardless, Gojo, he's Satoru freaking Gojo. He shrugs it off as another round of hand-to-hand combat ensues between him and Sukuna. And ladies and gentlemen, this is a golden panel, let me just say that right now. However, in the midst of battle, Sukuna takes Gojo by surprise once again, as he notices that Sukuna's domain sure hit attacks are turned off. Clearly, Sukuna is big braining another sneak attack against Gojo's reverse conditions domain. Like before, in order to destroy Gojo's domain from the outside, Sukuna had reduced the effective range to increase Malevolent Shrine's potency. But to further its dominating power, Sukuna made a binding vow, which came at the cost of removing his short hit attack inside Gojo's domain. Now, you must be wondering, ABD, if Sukuna's short hit attacks were absent, how did his brain not get completely fried from Gojo's domain? Well, that's because other than his experience and use of amplification, Sukuna has the valuable arsenal of Yuji's memories, taking us all the way back to chapter 15, when Gojo brought Yuji to his domain fight against Jogo, showing off his unlimited void. And of course, Sukuna was watching it unfold with hawk eyes. And of course, noticing that the only people immune to its effect are Gojo himself and the person touching him. In this way, he had already experienced this domain, and thus, by engaging Gojo in a close range battle, Sukuna made sure to constantly keep in touch with him. You cannot underestimate Sukuna, this guy. He's the strongest in history.
In the heat of battle, he don't miss.
So once again, Sukuna was able to destroy Gojo's domain and slashes him up. Seeing Gojo take this L, Kashimo declares he will go to fight Sukuna if he dies. Meanwhile, all the allies are like, bruh, what are you smoking? Kashimo must have some batshit crazy curse technique up his sleeve, as he told us that he is saving it for only Sukuna, as he wants to display against him. However, Gojo being Gojo pulls up. That's right, he read our tweet based on the last chapter. Alright, I'm kidding, that was just a plug to my Twitter. Please go follow our Twitter, make sure to like the video too. But we did predict it. Satoru uses the super secret anti-domain technique, Falling Blossom Emotion. As chapter 108 mentions, this technique is an art to counter domain expansion passed down through the big three sorcerer families. Much like Simple Domain, it's a technique to nullify an opposing domain attack, but Falling Blossom Emotion does this by covering the sorcerer in an armor of curse energy. This armor is then able to tank a domain's guaranteed hit, nullifying any attack by countering it with equal force, thus automatically defending the sorcerer. Whilst it has no use against a complicated domain like Unlimited Void, it is incredibly useful against physical attacks like Sukuna's slashes. On top of that, it doesn't get ripped away like Simple Domain. However, Falling Blossom Emotion doesn't ensure that the sorcerer will be unharmed, since it is not an ability that can match the output of a domain. Hence, Sukuna notes that Gojo was slashed up, but his cuts weren't that deep. Gojo states that he learned this technique as a kid, but never used it until now. But this raises the question, why did Gojo use Simple Domain earlier instead of Falling Blossom Emotion? Well, there can be many answers to this, including that Gojo might just be testing the waters. He's making stuff up along the battle, growing, learning, and adapting at a freakishly fast rate. But another explanation can be that Falling Blossom Emotion doesn't really stop the cuts like Simple Domain can, which would have been a downside when Sukuna's domain was belting out relentless attacks. In fact, using Simple Domain gave Gojo just enough time for him to heal his burnout, which he needed to counterattack as well as cast domain expansion again. But right now, Sukuna does not have his sure hit activated due to the new binding vow, so Gojo doesn't need to defend against constant slashes now, so he outmaneuvered Sukuna. Instead, he uses Falling Blossom Emotion because this time there were limited attacks that could be countered easily. Therefore, it's a stalemate again. Oh, so you thought? This battle is finna looking like this, bruh. Not wasting a single second to recover his curse technique burnout, my man Gojo cast domain expansion again. Of course, he could have just teleported out of Sukuna's domain, but just like how he didn't back down from Toji Fushiguro, he is not backing down from Sukuna either, living up to his choices and confidence and gamble, we could say, that he can defeat Sukuna, achieving the impossible. His choice to compete with his domain to overwhelm Sukuna's shows his winner's attitude and mindset, as he seems adamant on wanting to dominate him in this aspect since it's the best move of any sorcerer. This goes back to chapter 58 when Gojo himself taught Megami winning by dying and winning even if you die are two completely different things. Gojo is doing exactly what Jujutsu means, taking a gamble, since being a sorcerer is the amalgamation of trial and tribulations that sprout growth in a person. So with new conditions, Gojo cast a domain that was massive, enough to completely swallow Sukuna's entire effective range. But was this the wrong move? As Meme mentions, expanding the range of domain means trading off its refinement and potency. This means that even though it can't be destroyed from the outside, the chances of losing the battle inside the domain will increase.
भारी mistake हो गया sir.
However, completely subverting everyone's expectations and doing what they hadn't even thought about, Gojo shrinks his domain to a tiny sphere. He went from being trapped in a box to a bloody ball. So why exactly did Gojo do this? That's your next question. You're probably asking 100 questions right now. Well, in essence, just like Megami used a building as a makeshift barrier, Gojo trapped Sukuna's domain within his own barrier and then shrank it instantly to compress both domains. He found and exploited the weak point of open domains, that the barriers don't clash. Increasing his domain expansion range was a fake out to trap Sukuna into focusing on destroying Unlimited Void's barrier by strengthening external attacks and making his domain sure hit on the inside a little weaker. So Gojo quickly reduces the expansion to a small sphere and makes it much denser as well as much more refined. The exterior will be almost impenetrable, which means Sukuna will probably pull out Mahoraga so his brain doesn't get fried. This chapter brilliantly showcased Gojo's potential because he is like Saitama at this point, in that the stronger his opponent is, the stronger he becomes by tapping into all that potential he has. In fact, every single chapter non-stop, Gojo is revealing he can do new things, improving and changing even something as complex as domain expansion on the fly, which shocked everyone in the chapter. On the other hand, the fact that Sukuna is not giving an inch to Gojo to overpower him, even with a strong domain, really showcases the benefit of his experience fighting against other top tier sorcerers in the Heian era. Now, if you want to learn even more about Jujutsu Kaisen's history or just how strong Asta is in Black Clover, watch the videos on your screen right now.